So I'm happy to be with you this afternoon to talk about the socio-professional integration of immigrants in Quebec. The findings I'm going to be presenting today are the result of a major study that was conducted over 3 years from 2020 to 2023 that was funded by the Quebec Ministry of Immigration. So this research explored the issue of immigrant worker integration from an ecosystemic perspective. This means that we emphasize the fact that any consideration of integration depends both on factors specific to immigrants themselves, such as their proactivity in seeking employment, but also on the resources available to support their integration, such as NGOs. So the research was carried out in 4 stages. First, we surveyed approximately 500 immigrants. We also surveyed 330 employers from organizations of various sectors and sizes. We conducted individual interviews with 47 racialized immigrants, half men and half women. And finally, we conducted 5 focus group with 25 NGOs offering employability services to immigrants, representing all of Quebec's regions. So the systemic aspect was central to our approach, and the interaction between immigrants, employers, and NGOs gave us a complementary perspectives on the phenomenon of socio-professional integration. So first and foremost, I'd like to paint a picture of the immigrant employment context in Quebec. The main thing to note in this graph is that the proportion of immigrants in the Quebec workforce has been steadily increasing over the past 10 years. So as of 2022, nearly 1 in 5 people in employment in Quebec is an immigrant, and this figure continues to rise. We also note that the employment rate in Quebec is 5.5% higher for immigrants than it is for native-born Quebecers. And well, still, we see that the immigrants in Quebec have a higher unemployment rate, about 2% higher than native-born people. So integrating immigrants into the labor market is a major concern, not only for Quebec economic prosperity, but also for the well-being of immigrants themselves. And there's still a lot of work to be done to facilitate this integration, and particularly in terms of credentials and skills recognition. So our research reveals systemic barriers of socio-professional integration of immigrants. And the one I'm going to be presenting are the 6 main themes that emerge from our various data sources. And the first one would be the non-recognition of foreign credentials. And we choose to distinguish the recognition of foreign credentials from the recognition of experience and skills, since these 2 elements were quite clearly distinct in our research. Thus, recognition of foreign credential is more significant for immigrants working in regulated professions. And in contrast, we see the recognition of experience and skills acquired abroad as being a bit more relevant to the role of the employers. Immigrants and NGOs that we interviewed generally mentioned that the process is difficult, and it's mainly due to the strict regulation of professional associations, but also to the high costs and the time that is required, which is often incompatible with the urgency of finding work upon arrival in a new country. Others also spoke about the lengthy process of the comparative evaluation process. The second barrier that we found is the non-recognition of experience and skills. As I was saying, in our sample of 500 immigrants, 1 out of every 2 respondents have returned to school since arriving in Canada. And out of these, 82% claim to have obtained a degree in Canada. So what we see is that immigrants want their skills to be recognized, and often obtaining a Canadian diploma is seen as the only way to do so. In fact, the companies that we surveyed noted that it is difficult for them to evaluate credentials and expertise acquired abroad. So almost 30% of the large companies that we polled said that Canadian experience is an important requirement for getting a job within their company. So this finding highlights the difficulty employers have in recognizing the skills acquired abroad by immigrant workers. Then we also found a lack of efficiency in the Francization process. So in Quebec, French is the official language, and it is of the utmost importance. Knowledge of French may also be required in certain immigration programs, notably for permanent status. So the government offers free French courses to newcomers, which is known as Francization. It was mainly the NGOs that told us about the many situations in which the population they serve have encountered problems with the francization process. Firstly, they told us that the offer was inadequate due to a very long waiting list and a shortage of teachers. And one major criticism that seemed unanimous among all of those that we've met is that the level of French that is learned was not sufficient for work. It may prepares you for going grocery shopping and everyday life, but it certainly isn't enough to enter the job market, which is a big concern. We also found instances of discrimination in hiring and employment. Obviously, some respondents mentioned discriminatory behavior and attitudes from employers or colleagues, and others pointed out that certain human resources management practices had discriminatory effects on immigrants. In this regard, the majority of companies mentioned that they wanted to treat all employees and applicants equally. That's possibly demonstrating that there's a lack of understanding of the need to put in place targeted measures aimed at correcting the situation of people belonging to groups that are victims of employment discrimination. And this really points to, it reflects the employer's lack of awareness around DEI issues. And what we hear mainly from SMEs is that the added value of a diversified workforce is not clear. Which brings us to, as I was saying, the lack of organizational DEI practices and programs. Many of the companies that we surveyed stated that their measures do not target any particular group. So as a result, they do not seem to pay particular attention to Indigenous people, racialized people, and people with disabilities. So this may in part be explained by the fact that SMEs are exempt from federal and provincial employment equity legislation. And in fact, many of these companies that we surveyed are skeptical about employing a diverse workforce. So roughly 1 in 5 respondents feels that diversity measures are unfair, which is completely missing the point. NGOs were almost unanimous in mentioning that employers, managers, and human resources personnel lack the DEI skills needed to recruit, hire, and integrate immigrants into the workplace. Which brings us to the last barrier regarding the lack of coordination between stakeholders. And this is regarding the services offered to immigrants. There seems to be a lack of collaboration and coordination between the various stakeholders involved in the socio-professional integration of immigrants. And that is the different ministries, government agencies, programs, and NGOs. So sometimes we even see conflicts between the initiatives of the various partners. And for example, between 2 major stakeholders in Quebec, the Quebec Ministry of Immigration and the Quebec Ministry of Employment. So this fragmentation of services prevents sometimes immigrants from accessing services and information to support their integration. So several respondents also mentioned the administrative burden, the slowness of the processes, and the difficulty of accessing the right information at the right time. So what's more is there's still a lot of work to be done to make immigrants aware of the various programs available to support them. So the main impact of these barriers on immigrants is de-skilling. So de-skilling occurs when a worker occupies a job that does not correspond to his or her level of skill, education, or training. And the non-recognition of the experience and skills of immigrants, especially those from racialized groups, leads to a situation of de-skilling where they are forced into a survival job. More than half of the immigrants surveyed feel that they should have a higher position at work given their skill level. So it should be noted that de-skilling not only leads to a loss of income for immigrants, but also has major impacts on psychological health and well-being of the immigrants. Many of them told us about their feelings of failure, humiliation, frustration, and injustice. Obviously, being a woman, an immigrant, a racialized person, a mother, creates intersection that increase the barrier women face. Even today, household responsibilities fall mainly on women, and given the significant shortage of daycare places in Quebec, we often see women staying home to take care of their children. So what we see is women sacrificing their career to take survival job or to stay home with their kids, so their spouse can achieve their own career, or they can go back to school. And in some instances, these women never go back to a qualified job. Which bring us to some recommendations that could be derived from our research. As for the immigrants, first is to facilitate access to services for new immigrants and to continue our efforts to raise awareness of integration program. Because 70% of all the immigrants that responded to our survey have never used services offered to newcomers. So it would be useful to investigate the reason why immigrants not make use of these services and programs, as well as the other means that they're using to promote their integration. It would also be to adapt transition programs to better accommodate immigrants or with children and women, and better the content, as I was saying. And also to develop pre-departure information program, because all of the immigrants mentioned that they would have liked to have more information pre-departure on credential recognition requirements, for example. As for the employer, it will be to support the development of DEI programs, especially for SMEs, and to develop their capacities in assessing skills acquired abroad, and also to facilitate partnerships between NGOs and employers for them to better understand how to integrate immigrants into their workforce. And I'm going to finish by the NGOs, the recommendation for them. They really have a need for a better coordination and more cross-functionality, not only between them, but with all the stakeholders of the ecosystem. And lastly, we would suggest to adapt financing programs to allow a greater flexibility for the NGOs in their use of the allocated funding. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Vanessa. This is very interesting, and I'm sure it's going to be raising lots of questions, and we can certainly discuss your results with also the research that's going to be presenting next. So I would remind you, for those who just joined us, that there will be a discussion period at the end. So if you would like to post your questions in the key and in the Q&A feature, I will gladly then make sure that we take them into account in our discussion. So now I would like to invite Larissa Kanhai for the presentation on immigrant women leaders, challenges in the workplace. So I think that there is an interesting continuity between the both presentation. So please go ahead, Larissa.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Vanessa. Good afternoon. There we go. I'm Larissa Kanhai with the University of Manitoba. For the qualitative study, Bridging the Gender Gap, partnered with the Diversity Institute. I've spent the last year talking to over 50 women in corporate Canada about how they advanced in their careers. I'd like to discuss a few insights from our research that's applicable to immigrant women leaders in the workplace. The immigrant women I interviewed had overcome the initial entry barriers to employment and have made it to the C-suite, but they did not experience as smooth a path as others with allegedly normalized identities. Scholars and reports support the contention that barriers to employment success persist decades into a woman's career. The target demographic for our study was professional women in Canada who have progressed to the C-suite or senior leadership. All interviewees were highly educated, and we were pleased to recruit an overrepresentation of racialized and Indigenous women, providing richer data on the intersectional experience of advancement in the workplace. It's interesting to note that while immigrant experiences were not the focus of our study, we did have 23 participants self-identify as being born in another country, with a dozen countries represented, with many of the women having lived in Canada now for over 10 years. Okay, so here are perspectives directly from the interviewees. In this quote, the respondent says, "I wanted to find a job that would pay right away." Now, I heard variations of this so-called immigrant mindset, encouraging practicality, but also preventing some of the participants from considering a career versus job mindset for when they began. Some participants exhibited frustrations around the changing societal expectations of how women were supposed to behave. First, this participant was trying to hide her ethnicity, but then was later asked in her career to celebrate her differences. And she's quoted here asking, "Can't you people all make up your minds?" The influence of family is consistent across cultures, but of course, the act of moving across the world increases pressures and expectations. This respondent said, "My father had stars in his eyes every time he looked at me for what I could achieve and the dream that he came to this country for." Finally, this respondent's quote echoes with many other participants' sentiments. "I was raised to be successful and to contribute to society." As I move along today, please note that the stories I'm sharing are not models for how to succeed. I hope you do note insights, but the paths to success are highly individualized. Intergenerational influences affect immigrant women with family obligations, gender roles, and a predetermined definition of success. Some told us that their parents mandated their career options, be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, or a teacher, but that was it. The values, customs, and culture that one's raised with will obviously influence how they raise their own children, their children's children, and this is experienced positively, but can also pose challenges with different cultural standards. One participant noted that her parents were singularly focused on education as the key to success. What they had witnessed in their home communities was not only around race, but also class. Coming from a former British colony, they learned that the way out of one's class was through education. So she's quoted paraphrasing her parents, "The more education you get, the more successful you'll be, and the less racism will impact you." In several cases, women spoke of challenges coming to Canada as a newcomer, some not speaking the language, some were only children when they arrived. One spoke of watching her father lift his family out of poverty and achieve something unfathomable. This did leave her feeling like she needed to live up to his sacrifices. Many saw their educated parents unable to work in their own fields. Another spoke of lacking Canadian connections and feeling constrained by being different. This can foster what is commonly referred to as resilience. It's important not to romanticize immigrant struggles because it might suggest that the solution is just to work harder. There is research suggesting that struggle can provoke transformation and develop more sophisticated interpersonal skills. This tension between struggle and growth will perhaps pervade generations. The immigrant women I spoke to had different stories than the mainstream corporate recruits. One from a war-torn country, another a refugee, many sharing having a parent's voice in their head about how to navigate the workplace, but they didn't always agree with that voice. Amid resilience, there's a boldness that might be part of newcomer DNA. This can lead to risk-taking towards professional success, or it could lead to not wanting to take risks at all. The latter is understandable when an individual is undermined every day by feeling different every time you're misunderstood, every time your name is mispronounced, and every microaggression that you need to weigh whether or not to speak up about. There are intersecting factors that can impact one's experience. There's evidence, of course, that coming from different countries can result in different outcomes. One's age at arrival can impact their ability to integrate into Canadian society and workplaces. Gender identity and sexual orientation were not specifically discussed amongst my participants who were newcomers, but religious practices did come up. One participant advised, in her personal opinion, to not allow yourself to opt out of professional opportunities due to cultural conflicts. Don't compromise your values, work with it. One example was still go out for drinks if you are a non-drinker, but perhaps drink ginger ale. Another participant wouldn't go to a club where she felt uncomfortable, but instead she prepaid for her clients to enjoy themselves, and this way was able to still host without compromising her values. Economic status or class was discussed the most, as this was where some participants deeply felt a lack of privilege to their coworkers who appeared to have followed a prescribed path to success. As mentioned earlier, the constancy of microaggressions can be debilitating to one's mental health. This was experienced particularly by racialized women, both immigrants and non-immigrants, where they navigated successful careers amidst comments about hair, clothing, accents, hiding parts of their home life, even cultural celebrations. The majority of the women I interviewed described in some way feeling as though they were under a microscope due to their gender, which was then compounded for those with intersectional traits like race. Not having built-in supports was strongly felt by the women I spoke to who were on a corporate track. This is felt acutely as entry barriers to initial employment, but continues to be experienced as a barrier even for women in senior leadership. A 2018 study showed that skilled immigrants were earning less than Canadian-born workers despite having higher levels of education. This resonates with study results where the majority of respondents indicated amassing accreditations simply to be taken seriously and to not risk having their presence at the executive table questioned. The absence of community ties, networking, private schools, and the typical path to Bay Street did not exist for all of our respondents. There are challenges that are unique for newcomer women. Assumptions are made that you aren't a good communicator or shouldn't be front-facing staff if you have an accent. Or if you're an Asian, you should be a model minority Asian, which means a quiet, hard worker who doesn't rock the boat. Common advice to women professionals are less applicable. We often hear recommendations about speaking up, demanding work-life balance, leveraging your networks. But for different cultures, even for women who have seen professional success, there's different risks. They risk being perceived as a token, backlash for not representing their race. At more junior levels of employment, there's risk of being denied promotions, as well as perceived risk to PR status or citizenship for speaking up about disrespect or discrimination in the workplace. Contending with two worlds or cultures is just not easy. Gender challenges were observed both at work and at home in some cases for participants. It can be overwhelming having to prove yourself in a new corporate world and prove yourself to meet cultural and family obligations. Many of our participants did find support in their home life, potentially because of the challenges members of their household faced to integrate into society. But some still had set expectations to support their husbands, to be the primary caregiver, to be fully committed as a daughter and daughter-in-law, all of this causing great stress. On the other hand, I heard descriptions of powerful matriarchs. One respondent told her mother about a work conflict, who then counseled her to bring it up to her boss. When the respondent resisted, the Italian mother laid down the law and told her adult professional child that she was not welcome home for dinner until she spoke up for herself at work. Another example highlights the stress of not being supported at home for work decisions that could advance one's career, despite having been taught their whole lives to excel and to want more. This participant from India had one parent who was a risk taker and another more traditional. Her mother did not want her to move to another city for an opportunity to be manager, so she had to make an agreement with her parents to return home regularly to take the job. She's quoted saying, "Yes, I'm allowed to take these roles if I come home and be a good daughter on the weekend." In her culture, respect for parents is paramount, so when mom says no, this can indeed impact career decisions. Benefits can still be gleaned from our research that can be attributed to the immigrant woman's experience in the workplace. While family influence felt limiting in a few cases, it also instilled a competitive drive. One participant from Jamaica succinctly said, "Failure was not an option." This drive for education and success was a powerful motivator that came from a very different place than many of their Canadian-born colleagues. For one respondent, this drive motivated her educated parents to requalify in Canada rather than accept peer advice to take a factory job in order to integrate. She credits her parents for creating their own privileges, which then allowed her better access to Canadian mentors who advised her on career options. The women I spoke to did perceive barriers to advancement based on a lack of family connections, economic status, not fitting into traditional corporate identity, navigating gender barriers due to both cultural expectations and corporate norms. And despite advancing to executive positions, they still experience the contradictions where they're asked to be more and to be less at the same time. Scholarship and our research supports that this is the experience of many women in the workplace, but it is amplified for equity-deserving individuals. But another benefit that is noted from the study participants is the opportunity to trailblaze. Particularly for senior women leaders, every time one of them moves up, they're literally blazing a new trail because no one has cleared a path for them. They are doing everything for the first time. This is the best lesson that comes from not trying to find a single solution to the challenges of immigrant women in the workplace, but to customize what works for each person based on their circumstances, and to know that it's okay if no one has done it before. You can be the first one. So thank you for your time. My contact information is on the slide, and I will pass it on.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Larissa, and thank you very important and interesting topic. So again, questions can be posted in the Q&A feature for discussion at the end of this workshop. So let me now please introduce then Sharon Broughton, who will be presenting on another very important matter in a very important sector, which is foreign credential recognition, and especially in healthcare in response to the current healthcare worker shortage. So please, Sharon, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Tanya. And is everybody able to see my screen? Excellent. So I'll just start by saying a bit about the Diversity Institute. So we were founded in 1999 by Dr. Wendy Souquier, who is a professor of entrepreneurship and strategy at Ted Rogers School of Management at Toronto Metropolitan University. We are over 100 full-time researchers and staff, and we conduct research and interventions with our many community partners to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we're very committed to social justice, but also grounded in the business case for EDI. So I think the context in terms of the healthcare sector is probably not news to anyone attending. We know that we have acute shortages of healthcare professionals across Canada. We have an aging population. And in Q2 of 2023, just to put some numbers to it, there were 90,000 job vacancies in healthcare. And of those, around 30,000 were registered nurses or registered psychiatric nurses combined. And about 13,000 plus were licensed practical nurses. So lots of vacancies, the majority of which have been in place for over 3 months. And this has been going on for now over 2 years. We also know that we have 6 million Canadians that are without a family physician. That equates to 17,000 physicians that we are short. And by 2028, we know that that gap is projected to grow to 44,000. So Immigration, Refugee Citizenship Canada has responded to this healthcare shortage by opening up some new pathways. So they have a new dedicated immigration stream for healthcare workers. It includes 36 healthcare professions prioritized within the express entry system, of which doctors and nurses are also part of that. And just to give you a sense of the change. So in 2022, there were 8,600 temporary and permanent residences admissions who were internationally educated healthcare professionals. So of that 8,600, 4,000 were welcomed to Canada through permanent residency, and that 4,000 has been typical in recent years. The target going forward is to attract 8,000 internationally educated healthcare professionals through permanent residency streams. So although there are efforts at both federal and also at the provincial level to attract more internationally educated healthcare professionals to Canada, we also know that there are challenges in that many individuals, highly skilled immigrants to Canada, are not practicing in their field. So from 2015 to 2022, we welcomed 3,600 permanent residents who were physicians, internationally educated physicians, but only 26% were actually able to be matched to a residency position. So the residency positions have been a big challenge. There's only 331 spots in 2022. 90% of the residency positions are reserved for domestic graduates. So even when somebody goes through the whole process, the credentialing process, then the residencies present a roadblock. there have been 8 provinces that have introduced practice-ready assessments. So these are meant to replace the 2-year residency where an individual has already completed a residency in their home country before they immigrated to Canada. And they would complete, in this case, a 12-week supervised practice in place of the residency. The challenge is, again, the spaces for these are very limited. Like many provinces don't only have 50 spots. So the result in 2021, there were only 124 internationally educated physicians who actually obtained licensure through this process. The recent Stats Canada data, our census data for 2021 show that there were actually around 40,000 internationally educated physicians in Canada, around 20,000 in Ontario, but unfortunately half are not working in their profession. So the process, the licensure process, is a large barrier. It's very complex, prolonged, and then when you get to that residency or PRA spot, there's limited spots available. We see the same thing with internationally educated nurses. They face similar challenges. 54% are underemployed. So from 2015 to 2022, Canada welcomed 8,600 internationally educated nurses. And they represent internationally educated healthcare professionals represent 22% of nursing and healthcare support of the nursing and healthcare support workforce, but only 9% of registered nurses. And when we look at where internationally educated healthcare professionals are more predominant in nurses, aides, orderlies, patient service associates. And if we look at, again, the 2021 census data, there are approximately 85,000 internationally educated healthcare professionals in Canada that have a nursing background, but only 42% are working as nurses. So 21% are working as nurses, aides, orderlies, patient service associates. 33% are working in other occupations for which they're overqualified. So we have, a huge gap. And so I actually, not sure what happened to one of my slides, but I did want to say as well, there's an intersectional aspect to this, that 87% of immigrants working in nursing and healthcare occupations are women. 84% immigrated from emerging economies, so 30% from the Philippines, 15% from Africa, and that's the 2 countries with the most immigration, Nigeria and Ethiopia. 15% immigrated from the Philippines, and that's almost all from Jamaica, 15% from the Caribbean, almost all from Jamaica and Haiti, and 8% from India. And of those who are working in the nursing aid or healthcare support occupations, only 2% intended to do so upon entering Canada. So there are lots of barriers in terms of the criteria, the costs, the timing that it takes, the limited residency and PRA spots, and embedded bias throughout the process. So, implications, we have, this continued healthcare crisis. As was mentioned earlier, we have system-imposed underemployment and de-skilling of very highly skilled immigrants. We also know that the result is that we have a healthcare workforce that's not representative of our population. So although 23% of the population are immigrants, we know only 9% of our registered nurses are immigrants. And there's been several studies showing how this has resulted in health inequities for immigrants in Canada. I would just also say the assumption that Canada's healthcare system is elite, so it's kind of like this bar that you have to meet, but you can only meet it, you can never exceed it, also prevents us and blocks new ideas and better practices and learning that we could have from all the expertise of the internationally educated healthcare professionals that we're fortunate to attract to Canada. So I would also say that this is not about high entry to practice standards needed for quality care, because other countries that we would say have similar public health care systems do a lot better job at integrating skilled newcomers into the healthcare system. So for example here in 2021, physicians educated outside the EU and UK represented 50% of new doctors in the UK. So this equated to 10,000 new doctors in 2021. And, as we saw from the previous slides, this would not be possible in Canada with the limited number of residency and PRA positions. So this slide just shows a comparison on workforce integration. On the left-hand side are registered nurses. On the right-hand side are doctors. And in Canada, as I mentioned, internationally educated nurses are 9% of the registered nurses, versus if you see Australia, 29%, the UK, 36%. And in the UK, that breaks down to 16% were educated in non-British EU countries, and 20% were educated in internationally outside of the EU. For doctors in Canada, about 24% of our doctors were internationally educated physicians, versus Ireland, it's 40%. And that number is a little bit different than the nurse number, in that 40% for Ireland, the bar on the far right, that only includes individuals who are educated outside Ireland and the EU. So this next chart expresses the comparison in a different way. So here we're looking at the top two bars are internationally educated nurses. The bottom two bars are internationally educated physicians. And this comparison is to Australia. And we're looking at the percentage of internationally educated nurses or physicians who are earning less than half the median income in their field. So in Australia, about 5% of internationally educated nurses are making less than half the median income in their field, whereas in Canada, that's about 55%. In Australia, about 10% of internationally educated physicians are making less than half the median income in their field. In Canada, that's 60%. And we saw in the previous slides, it's because often, because of the regulatory process, nurses, internationally educated nurses and physicians are not able to practice in their field, and there's that de-skilling process. So that's reflected also in earnings. What can we learn from some of the other jurisdictions? Well, they all have much more simple, transparent, streamlined, and national licensure processes. That's one real complexity in Canada. Every single province has separate processes, and they're quite complex. I will note that Australia did have state level processes until 2010. So this is more recent. In the last 13 years, they made the decision. They had a number of professions that they had shortages in, that they knew that was going to be a long-term thing. Nurses and doctors were two of them, engineers, dentists, there were a number of professions, and they made the decision to collaborate and bring the licensure process at a national level. They also looked at their process and really tried to streamline it to try to accelerate the number of the rate of licensure for internationally skilled newcomers. So that is one of the things I would say is different. They also have articulation agreements between universities and more kind of global, nation level bilateral agreements that help with the equity, systems of recognition of skills and qualifications. And generally they're either outcomes based or they have a practical evaluation. In Ireland, for instance, nurses can choose whether to write an exam or do a bridging program. But it's usually one or the other. You don't have to do both, whereas oftentimes in our situation, both can be required. I'm going to just, in the interest of time, skip through the recommendations because I'm going to talk about some recent changes in terms of the pathways. So certainly we can learn from the international jurisdictions. I think there's lots to learn there. We've also seen more recently 2 provinces and more recently announcement from PEI, but fast track the internationally educated nurse pathways. And here I'm talking specifically about registered nurses. So in Nova Scotia, internationally educated nurses educated and licensed in Australia, India, New Zealand, Nigeria, Philippines, UK, or the USA, which are about 87% of their applicants. Now they don't have to go through, it used to be a national credential evaluation and then a provincial credential evaluation. Now there is actually not an evaluation. There is the regulator validates that they have the education credential from that country, validates that they have a license in good standing from that country. And that's a very quick process. And then they are required to pass the NCLEX RN exam, which is required of all domestic and international graduates in Canada for the licensure requirement. So what Nova Scotia did is they used an equity lens and they went through 10 years of National Nurse Assessment Service credential evaluations, and they went through 10 years of the NCLEX RN exam results and looking at pass rates, and determined that there was equivalency here. We only need to validate those credentials and then do the exam. So that has made a huge difference. Alberta did a similar thing. So IENs educated in Philippines, India, US, UK, Australia, Nigeria, Jamaica, New Zealand, and Ireland, which is 94% of their applicants. They have their credentials similarly, no longer go through a national and then a provincial process for assessment, case-by-case assessment. Rather, it's validation. They validate their education credentials, their licensure in good standing. And then in Alberta, they do have an additional exam. They have a registration exam, but passing that also satisfies the language test requirement. Then they have the NCLEX RN exam. And I will just say that the regulator with these changes, they have been able to accelerate the licensure at such a level that they, in the first month after making these changes, registered over 1,400 internationally educated nurses. And that was 2.5 times what the number of licenses to internationally educated nurses in the 4 years prior. So just to, the dramatic difference, going through these types of processes and doing more global assessments can make. Other things that have happened, there have been a number of bursary programs introduced to help with the costs. Sometimes these have return of service agreements where people have to actually work in a rural area or meet some other criteria. There's also been most of the provinces now have a temporary class licensure. So it used to be available to new graduates, domestic graduates, but not to internationally educated nurses. Now in most provinces, you can have work in your profession while you're waiting to write your exam. In Ontario, you do require a job offer to do so. But I'll just close it off there and save the rest for the discussion. But I guess I'll just say that, what we've seen in Nova Scotia, certainly would like to see more countries added. But what we've seen in Nova Scotia and Alberta and in the other jurisdictions, I think are proof of the opportunity that we have to leverage, the extensive skills of newcomers in our healthcare system for the benefit of newcomers and being able to practice in their fields, and for our healthcare system and all of Canadians in that skills recognition. And that is.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I know, foreign credential recognition is key, of course, to the social professional integration of immigrants, especially in all regulated professions. And it's a complex matter, so I'm sure you're going to be having, and I'm sure I have questions for you for the discussion period. So thank you again. And let me remind again, the participants that the only way to ask questions is through the Q&A feature. So please do post your questions so that we can address them during the discussion period. So as I was saying, last but not least, Caitlin Donsberko from the Diversity Institute from Toronto Metropolitan University, and using now technology-enabled platforms to help overcoming the barriers to employment success. So please go ahead, Caitlin.
Great, thank you, Tanya. As you said, I'm Caitlin Sperko, Director of Research Special Projects here at the Diversity Institute, and today I'm presenting on overcoming barriers to employment success through technology-enabled platforms. First, we'll go over a little bit of context, the changing environment of work, the business case for diversity, and then tech-enabled pathways and projects. My colleague Sharon already spoke a little bit to the Diversity Institute, but at DI, we undertake research to advance diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Our research then informs our programming, customized strategies, and the resources or technology that ends up being developed. So the workforce in Canada is changing. Workforce growth will come through immigration, but there are barriers to employment for equity-deserving groups. Underemployment and skills underutilization for equity-deserving groups is evident. Projections show that within the working age population, the racialized population will likely increase to over 40% by 2041. Then thinking about retirements, with more than 1 in 5 people of working age between 55 to 64, which sets up a market of record retirements. Immigrants here will assist in filling this gap, but businesses need to look further at equity-deserving groups. Digital skills and technology learning platforms offer solutions to upskill and reskill the labor force, which can look to bridge both real and perceived gaps in the workforce. And the reason I say perceived gaps is due to the barriers to employment for equity-deserving groups. So, barriers to employment for equity-deserving groups. Applicants with foreign-sounding last names are 20% less likely to get interviews in large organizations and 30% less likely in small and medium enterprises. There's a lack of access to networks. More than 85% of jobs are not advertised, but filled through social networks, particularly when thinking of small and medium enterprises. And many organizations continue to rely on traditional methods of recruitment, which include or exclude or are inaccessible to many equity-deserving groups. Organizations also have a history of devaluing international credentials, like my colleagues here have stated. For example, STEM-educated immigrants working in STEM occupations earned 17% less than their Canadian-born counterparts in 2020. Let's dig into this a little bit further. 44% of engineers with foreign degrees in Ontario were underemployed, compared with 21% of Canadian degree holders. 50% of internationally trained women engineers in Canada are underemployed. But evidence shows that once companies have experience hiring and working with immigrants, they will continue to hire them. These next 2 slides underscore the labor shortages that businesses face that hinder their ability to achieve production and sales targets. This particular source is from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And the percentage of small and medium enterprises that indicated that recruiting skilled employees is an obstacle for them in the 3rd quarter of 2022. So 67% of SMEs with 100 or more employees, 63% for 20 to 99 employees, 5 to 19 had a 53% indication that this was a challenge for them, and 25% or a quarter of those that had 1 to 4 employees. Now here comes the case for equity, diversity, inclusion, or the business case for diversity. So equity, diversity, and inclusion aren't only the right thing to do, they also have positive impact on businesses and organization. So diversity supports broadening the talent pool and overcoming skills gaps. As I mentioned, many small and medium enterprises and employers rely on informal networks for recruitment, which underscores the idea that it's not the pool, it's the policies, the practices, and the intention of these organizations when building out their talent pools. Diversity also fosters innovation, creativity, and diversity of thought. More diverse firms may be more innovative, generating more income derived from new products and services. Diversity, particularly at the decision-making table, enables new ideas for marketing, creative decision-making, product development, and much more. It also helps individuals and organizations respond to stakeholder demands and market changes. Consumer demand is changing. 55% of Canadian consumers prefer products and services that reflect their values and beliefs. Governments, large corporations, and others are increasingly recognizing the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and are really starting to consider it when it comes to procurement. And then there's mitigating legal and reputational costs. This is increasingly important for organizations. When you think of all the time and effort that goes into building organizational reputation, and the minutes it would take to ruin it if there are missteps around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then finally, it's about increasing employee satisfaction and reducing turnover. So organizations with gender diversity and policies and practices encouraging equity deserving groups to be engaged are linked with employee retention. When people feel valued, they want to stay, be productive, provide their best work, and help the company grow. While this presentation will really focus on broadening the talent pool and reducing turnover, it's very important to know that this falls as part of that bigger picture. So let's look at the skills and employment ecosystem. There are challenges in the ecosystem, both on the supply and the demand side. It may be perceived that job seekers may lack skills needed by employers or access to information needed to navigate the job market, the supports needed to enable the development of skills, the motivation to learn and upgrade their skills. Meanwhile, service providers, whether they're post-secondary institutions, private training providers, or community organizations, need to better develop skills that meet the needs of employers, better meet the needs of job seekers, and provide wraparound supports, particularly for vulnerable groups. And this is where technology can come in and support with the development of skills, innovative approaches to recruitment, innovative approaches to upskilling and reskilling, and then developing more inclusive work environments. So we'll dig into this a little bit deeper. So keeping in mind where technology can support the inclusive hiring and engagement processes, technology can be enabled as pathways for newcomers. So ways this can be done are through the assessment of innovative tools for skills development, such as learning management systems platforms, so that's LMS, English as a second language tools, with a focus on essential skills, technical skills, adaptive learning for customization, culturally appropriate materials, and then behavioral nudges and badging to improve engagement, and then retention and completion. So this ensures that there is accessibility both digitally and culturally for newcomers. For example, newcomers in urban areas may have access to more services than newcomers who come to more remote areas who have very limited access. Then we can look at the assessment of scalability for pre-arrival training, especially for refugees with iPhone delivery. So smartphone apps available through iPhones or Android, various phones. I won't name drop all the various software here, but example of this are cities that offer these services through various apps like New TO. So Toronto Newcomer app offered through Toronto North Local Immigration Partnership. Welcome to Canada offered in BC, Manitoba, Alberta, and Saskatchewan in 9 languages. And then New Welcome available in PEI, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and New Brunswick in 8 languages. Pathways can also include learning circles and peer support, wraparound supports, which include culturally appropriate online mental health supports, public transportation costs for training and employment programs, on-site daycare, providing digital equipment and access to computers, internet, etc. And then strategies to build social capital, whether it's sponsorship or networking opportunities. Going through a lot of this, there's a lot of opportunities for newcomers to engage with things that are technology enabled, but also enabled through people that can be accessed through technology. So that's why we're really underscoring a bunch of these efforts here. Employer engagement strategies. So a refugee employer roundtable campaign, whether it's brought out through technology or otherwise. And then there's competency frameworks, assessments, and then connections via Magnet. So examples of this include programs built on the Magnet platform, such as Lifeline Challenge, which includes Lifeline Afghanistan and Lifeline Ukraine, which offers settlement and employer assistance focusing on career pathways for refugees. Services offered in several languages to assist refugees to create online profiles, assistance with job banks, job matching, and resources on the Lifeline Challenge platform. And now you heard me mention on the preceding slide about the Magnet's platform and the Magnet ecosystem. So let's take a look at an example of this. So Magnet is a digital community workforce system. They create a broad, adaptable, and integrated digital platform that bridges between labor market supply and demand, matching job seekers with employers. At an organizational level, the Magnet ecosystem designs learning platforms to connect job seekers with employers, and the focus is really on getting people hired and opening doors by creating training platforms for current and in-demand skills. So current impacts for this platform across Canada include over 1 million participants connected to job postings, 40,000 work integrated learning opportunities through wage subsidy programs, 230,000 job seekers using Magnet to connect to opportunities, and 52,000 employers use Magnet to connect to resources and opportunities such as people looking for employment. Advantages of using this technology-enabled platform is really on guided job search, job matching and invites. And once again, using that Lifeline Challenge or Lifeline Afghanistan example, finding specific employers that are looking to onboard newcomers, refugees, etc. And then there's features that go beyond employment, resume and building and interview skills, bridging customs, skill sets and cultural nuances, working on self-advocacy, and then targeted messages and resources that really pinpoint various opportunities for the groups and the participants on these platforms. Now, taking a step away from direct job matching, I'm looking at the tech-enabled pathways and projects here that we're leveraging at the Diversity Institute and with some of our partners. Ontario Chamber of Commerce Skills Bridge is really focused on upskilling and reskilling the existing talent within small and medium enterprises. It's a platform that offers small and medium enterprises top-down and bottom-up content creation opportunities and provides access to a host of training resources that can support their recruitment and skill development by deploying free and sponsored training and skills development content, identifying and validating training content that meets the needs of various small and medium enterprises, and then providing access to training resources that promote diverse and inclusive hiring practices, and then developing an evidence-based training model that is cost-effective and scalable. So really underscoring the upskilling of existing talent, but also from an organizational perspective, how do you make your organization more inclusive through these training opportunities as well? So just a high-level look at some of these success metrics so far to date. So the course feedback is that 96% believed learning objectives were clearly outlined, 80% believed that the course was the right length, and most achieved course learning objectives. So focusing on making sure that the technology meets the needs of the people where they are so that they can get leveled up and take those next steps, whether they're already within a company, looking to get within a company or small medium enterprise, or addressing the needs that are already within that organization to become more equitable, diverse, and inclusive. Now, moving over to education-centered technology, there's a number of tools and platforms or solutions that are focused on upskilling, reskilling for employable and job-ready skills. These include experience learning platforms or learning management systems and content platforms, which can include Blackboard and Moodle, Google Classroom, Canvas and Saba, program delivery platforms such as Adept Pro, which was made by Deloitte and HowSpace. And then there's more of those micro learning platforms such as Talent Cards and SmartUp. When we're thinking about newcomers, language learning platforms such as Duolingo or Babbel are a good way to engage in a little bit of gamified learning while still upskilling in various capacities. And then leveraging existing content libraries such as Khan Academy, knowledge management services such as SharePoint, KMS Lighthouse, and then working with workflow learning tools such as Enable Now. Now, switching from education technology to upskilling, reskilling, and matching with jobs, MyStarter, which is now at DI, accelerates employer-led hiring and related supports for diverse job seekers. It was first developed with Starbucks Canada in collaboration with employers such as Walmart, TELUS, and Bell Canada, and is designed to support youth-facing barriers and helps break the no experience, no job, and no job, no experience catch-22. This program and platform has worked with more than 20,000 young people in Canada to help them secure jobs with extensive evidence-based skills development, training, and employment programs. So at Diversity Institute, we see MyStarter as a valuable addition to the ecosystem of employers, job seekers, community partners, training programs, and wraparound supports. And it's also the employment engine for a number of DI's upskilling programs, such as Adapt, Adapt for Success, and Adapt for Black Youth. Now, at the organizational perspective, when we're looking at equity, diversity, inclusion, and technology-enabled platforms, organizations need effective equity, diversity, inclusion strategies to keep pace in a rapidly changing environment. With the aging population and declining birth rate, immigration has become the principal source of labor market growth in Canada, as we've mentioned throughout our various presentations today. But research and experience once again has shown a strong EDI strategy linked to your corporate strategy or organizational strategy will help organizations attract the best and the brightest, access increasingly diverse markets, drive innovation, creativity, etc. The diversity assessment tool, or DAT, as you may hear me call throughout this presentation, was developed by the Diversity Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University with a range of partners to support organizations to develop EDI strategies aligned to their business needs. The DAT application, or DAT app, is the first digital tool to dynamically assess the diversity and inclusion policies and practices of organizations and to help organizations develop EDI strategies based on where they are and where they need to go. It's an easy and accessible to use platform that shares customized knowledge, tools, and resources with organizations to help implement these strategies. So very high level, going through the categories that we mentioned here is the various 6 pillars, starting with leadership and governance, human resource practices, values and culture, all the way to outreach and expanding the pool. So once again, looking at diversity assessment, automating that in the way through the data, and looking at 6 dimensions that are core to business and providing results. And just a high level example of how impactful a tool like this can be. What I'm showing on the screen here is what we call our spidergram. It is an image of how well an organization has performed throughout the diversity assessment tool application. We have an anonymized SME's first attempt here. So we have levels from minimal and regulatory compliance all the way to level 5, which is the highest at strategic integration. The SME in this case is showing between levels 1 and 2 of minimal and regulatory compliance as their first attempt. So after they got their results, they received actionable feedback that was automated through our diversity assessment tool that said, you are currently here in your business, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and here's an example of a best practice. So we have level 2s all the way around. But once they received their report, they took the data assessment 1 month later. So this is their second attempt. There's marked improvements across all areas of our spidergram, except for governance and leadership, which is notably hard within a small and medium enterprise, which really proves that intent and prescriptive action work. If people know what they need to do and have examples of how to do it right with intent behind equity, diversity, inclusion, whether it's employing newcomers, immigrants, etc., intent takes form of action. Just about to wrap up here, as I know we need to leave some time for our Q&A at the end, but underscoring the idea that innovation is not just about technology. It's about doing things differently. Without adoption, there is no innovation. But innovation at the end of the day isn't about making the tech, it's about using it. And we have to think about the transformation of organizational processes, how we change behavior and the choices that we make. And we'll leave you with this final message, this new narrative of inclusion leading to innovation. Let's make sure that organizations have the tools and resources they need to build inclusive organizations, considering human resource processes, outreach, expanding the pool, their governance and leadership strategy, while making sure that their organizational culture, policies, and practices actually speak to building an inclusive environment where newcomers, immigrants, and equity-deserving groups can all play a part of the picture. So thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over to Tanya.
Well, thank you very much, Caitlin. Oh my, really very interesting presentation. Thank you so much to all of you. Before I start maybe with going back to some of the wider questions and making sure that everyone would again have a chance maybe to state what they needed to say also, and because of time, and thank you for keeping up with the time. I will address this question to you, Caitlin, directly. It comes from one of the participants. You have stated and you have presented many applications, and of course everybody would like to know whether they have been assessed in a way, or we know how successful they are, and knowing also what's with artificial intelligence and using sometimes technology and the bias that can be brought within these applications. So maybe just a few words if they have been evaluated, some of them, and I think our participant mentioned the North Toronto LIP, so I don't know if you know this one in particular. And how are you making sure that there are no bias inside these platforms?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your question. So I'll first address about how successful the various platforms have been. The tools in which they've been used have been evaluated at different levels, and depending on the organizations. That was more of an oversight of a lot of different tools that are available and have been used in various organizations, whether it's from a language capacity standpoint or what's available in your local ecosystem. So this was more about providing ideas of what is available and providing that as part of whatever process that you're using, acknowledging that they're there. But when we're thinking about bias, which was the other part of your question, or maybe even bias when it comes to AI, we have to think about AI being trained by people. What are the checks and balances when it comes to who is getting in the door past the preliminary screening? Some anecdotal evidence of people using keywords to make it past the screening process, but that's only because they know the system. So if there are unspoken rules, how is everybody supposed to engage fairly? And when it comes to maybe more about mitigating the risk or bias within various pieces of technology, we have to acknowledge that machines, technology, formulas all can hold bias because they are trained by humans or leveraged by humans and about the way that we use them. So once again, tracking who is getting past the first stages into interviews. What does the entirety of the talent pool look like? Are the people getting in the door representative of the entire pool or only a very specific group? So focusing on the constant improvement and iteration, engaging with partners on that feedback is a very important aspect of mitigating that bias.
Okay. Thank you, Caitlin. Well, my next question is a bit, building on Danielle Gebre's question in the Q&A. Vanessa started with talking about how professional integration for immigrants is certainly a complex process. There are many stakeholders, and there's great importance in a more integrated vision in looking at the strategy coming from the different stakeholders. Then Larissa examined how women leadership among women immigrants can be achieved. Sharon focused on a very important matter, which is the skills recognition, whether we are in regulated profession like nurses and physicians, but also non-regulated professions, which is also, it's usually employer that takes care of setting if they do recognize some of the skills or not, although sometimes government or the Ministry of Education can give a hint whether to give some of the skills recognition. And Caitlin, of course, on the importance of also educating employers. So the question is, what can the government do? Because an immigrant to be in socio-professionally integrated needs a job. So what can government do and what can employers do? And maybe going back to you, Sharon, what are the recommendations that you did not have time to state would help, again, some skills recognition? So I will start maybe with Vanessa. So maybe on the part of employers, governance, what are we missing here? And especially with the labor market that we have now and the skills shortages that we have.
Well, yes, the first thing would be to implement DEI programs and practices. It seems obvious, but many SMEs don't have them in places, as Caitlin was saying, and as I was saying. So among the many things that these programs should contain, employers should make sure to actively promote a diverse and inclusive workplace culture, provide cultural competency training to all employees, offer flexible work arrangements to accommodate all employees, including immigrants. They can also establish mentorship programs to pair immigrants employees with experienced colleagues. And that just 4 things amongst many, many things that could be put in place by employers. The second thing that is paramount is to support initiatives that facilitate the recognition of foreign credentials and qualification, as we've been all saying today. And I will just finish by saying that the last thing would be that I would suggest would be to partner with NGOs. There's a very large proportion of them that I've met that offers services to employers, but they don't seem to partner with them. So I don't know why. And that would be my 3 recommendations on that.
Well, thank you very much, Vanessa. Larissa?
Thank you. Some of our research uncovered with the EDI recommendations from participants requesting incentives being offered within employment. So this is in the corporate sector, but I think can possibly apply to the question around about the government role. The questions on strategy, the organizational buy-in are a given for the to be able to properly integrate the EDI pieces as is desired. However, our participants asked for accountability and action. They said that these resources exist, this knowledge exists, but it's not happening, and it's not happening meaningfully. I think of what Caitlin said around intent and action. So one of the calls that they had made was around accountability, a suggestion being for incentives. So that is one method where governments could possibly improve.
Thank you very much, Larissa. I think Sharon, really very quickly, because I think we are at the end of the session. There is something I think about the importance of recognition credential, and I think you have given many recommendations. Unfortunately, I think we are a bit missing time, but I'm sure that you will make your research available. There's lots of recommendation, and especially what to do, at the provincial level as well. Especially we know that, for instance, Quebec and all provinces has a say in, of course, immigrant integration at least. Thank you very much. I would like to thank very much the Diversity Institute for organizing the workshop. I am very proud to say that I'm part of the Diversity Institute as an affiliated researcher. And thank you very much for your very rich and interesting presentation today. And I am sure they have added to the discussion, and especially to the insights that we need to follow, because I think there is lots of space to do better anyway. And thank you again. Thank you very much to all of you. And thank you for all participants for being here.